At 3:17 in the morning, while most people are asleep, billions of dollars quietly move through the global financial system. Not to buy houses, not to pay salaries, not to build factories, just to escape cash. That's the strange part. The wealthy spend their entire lives trying to accumulate money, and then, the moment they get it, they rush to convert it into almost anything else. Real estate, stocks, art, private companies, farmland, gold, data centers, even vintage watches. But cash is treated like melting ice. And the people who understand money best seem to trust it the least, because the rich know something most people don't. A dollar sitting still is not safe. It's dying slowly. And the system was designed that way. Right now, millions of people believe having more money in the bank means becoming financially secure. But over the last few decades, something strange happened. The average person started saving money, while the wealthy started borrowing it. That inversion tells you almost everything. A middle-class worker gets paid. They deposit money into a bank account. The bank gives them maybe 1% interest, sometimes less. Meanwhile, inflation quietly eats 3%, 5%, sometimes 8% of purchasing power per year. So even when the number in the account goes up, the actual value goes down. It feels safe because the digits are stable. But stability can be deceptive. Imagine putting an ice cube in a vault. The vault is secure. Nobody can steal it, but the ice cube still melts. That's modern cash. And the rich learned this lesson a long time ago. Not from motivational books, from history. In 1971, the United States ended the gold standard. Most people barely noticed, but financially, it changed the rules of the world. Before that moment, currencies were partially tied to gold. There was friction, limits, constraints. After 1971, governments could create money far more freely, and they did. The global money supply exploded, not all at once, quietly, gradually, year after year, which created a strange illusion. Homes became more expensive, stocks climbed higher, tuition exploded, healthcare costs surged. People thought assets were becoming more valuable. In reality, money itself was becoming less scarce. That's a very different thing. A millionaire in the 1980s looked wealthy. Today, in many cities, $1 million buys an apartment and a parking space. The numbers stayed impressive. The purchasing power changed completely. The wealthy understood this faster than everyone else, which is why they stopped treating cash as wealth. Cash became a temporary parking lot, nothing more. The moment large amounts of money arrive, the game changes from earning to preserving purchasing power. And preserving purchasing power requires movement. That's why rich people buy assets so aggressively, sometimes even when prices seem absurd. To the average person, buying a skyscraper for hundreds of millions sounds reckless. But holding cash for 20 years can be even riskier, especially in a system where inflation is not an accident. This is the uncomfortable part. Inflation is often described like bad weather, unfortunate, unpredictable, outside human control. But modern economies quietly depend on inflation. Governments carry enormous debt. Businesses rely on growth. Consumers are encouraged to spend. Banks profit from lending. The system works better when money moves, not when it sits. If everyone suddenly stopped spending and hoarded cash, economies would slow violently. Debt becomes harder to repay. Businesses collapse. Unemployment rises. So the system subtly punishes inactivity and rewards ownership. That's why asset prices often rise faster than wages. The people who own things benefit first. The people who save cash fall behind slowly enough that it feels invisible, until years pass. Then suddenly, a normal house costs 10 times more than it used to. There's an irony here. Banks market themselves as places that protect wealth. Massive vault doors, security systems, formal suits, words like stability and trust. But banks don't actually want your cash sitting there untouched forever. They want circulation. Your deposits become loans, mortgages, investments, leverage. Your idle cash is productive for them, just not necessarily for you. In fact, during periods of high inflation, banks can almost look polite while quietly helping destroy purchasing power. A savings account earning 2% during 7% inflation is mathematically negative. But psychologically, people still feel responsible for saving, because humans confuse nominal numbers with real value. If someone told you your salary doubled, but the price of everything tripled, you wouldn't celebrate for very long. Yet on a national scale, this happens constantly, and it changes behavior. The wealthy react by acquiring scarce assets, because scarcity matters more than currency. Think about Manhattan real estate. There will only ever be so much land there. Same with beachfront property. Oil reserves, fine art from dead painters. Shares in dominant companies, scarcity acts like gravity for capital. When money supply expands faster than scarce assets expand, asset prices rise. Not because rich people are emotional gamblers, because mathematically, they're trying to outrun dilution. And sometimes the richest people don't even use their own cash to buy assets. They borrow. That confuses people the first time they see it. Why would a billionaire take loans? Because in an inflationary system, debt can become cheaper over time. Imagine borrowing money at 3% interest while your assets rise 10% annually. The debt shrinks relative to the asset growth. Meanwhile, your cash stays invested. This is one of the biggest hidden divides between ordinary savers and wealthy investors. The average person uses labor to earn money, then stores money as cash. The wealthy use assets to acquire debt, then use debt to buy more assets. Different game, different rules. And once you notice this, strange headlines suddenly make sense. Why corporations hold real estate. Why billionaires buy farmland. Why central banks themselves hold gold. Why luxury property in cities keeps attracting global capital even when locals can't afford it anymore. It's not always about income. Sometimes it's simply about escaping currency dilution. Now, to be fair, cash is still necessary. The rich absolutely keep liquidity. They need reserves, operational capital, emergency flexibility, but they rarely keep enormous amounts sitting idle for decades. Because cash has one major weakness. It's guaranteed to remain cash. That sounds obvious, but think about it carefully. A productive business can grow, land can appreciate, stocks can compound, rental property can generate income. Cash does none of that by itself. It waits, and waiting has become expensive, especially after 2020. When the pandemic hit, governments and central banks unleashed historic levels of stimulus. Trillions entered the global economy in astonishing speed. Asset markets surged. Housing exploded upward. Stock markets hit record. Cryptocurrency mania erupted. Luxury goods soared. Suddenly used watches appreciated faster than salaries, which is objectively ridiculous and yet perfectly logical in an environment flooded with liquidity. When money becomes abundant, scarce things absorb the excess first. The wealthy benefited massively because they already owned assets before the expansion began. Meanwhile, many workers received wage increases that looked large on paper, but lagged behind actual living costs. Again, the illusion of numbers. This is why two people can earn the same salary across different decades and experience completely different lives. One bought assets before inflation accelerated. The other arrived later, after prices had already repriced upward. Timing matters enormously in monetary systems, and that creates another uncomfortable truth. Many people believe wealth comes mainly from hard work. Hard work matters, but asset ownership matters differently, sometimes more. A person can work 80 hours a week and still lose ground financially if their wages grow slower than asset inflation. Meanwhile, someone holding appreciating assets can gain wealth while sleeping, not because they're morally superior, not because they work harder, but because the system rewards ownership differently than labor. That realization makes people uncomfortable because it challenges the story most societies tell themselves. Work hard, save money, be patient. But increasingly, patient cash saving alone struggles to keep pace with asset inflation, and wealthy people know it. That's why many of them behave in ways that seem irrational to everyone else. They buy companies at enormous valuations. They collect land they'll never personally use. They purchase art that sits in storage. They hold assets across multiple countries and currencies. To outsiders, it can look excessive, but underneath it is a very cold calculation. What will still hold value 20 years from now if currencies continue expanding? That's the real question. And history offers clues. Empires change, governments fall, currencies weaken, inflation comes and goes in waves. But productive assets tend to survive. Railroads survived monetary reset. Land survived political shifts. Major companies adapted through decades of currency debasement. Cash rarely wins long-term historical battles against expansionary monetary systems. Which brings us to the final irony. Most people think rich people obsess over making money without noticing. And that's the part most people never see. The wealthy aren't necessarily preparing for collapse. Many are simply adapting to incentives exactly as the system designed them. A system where cash slowly melts, debt can become advantageous. Asset ownership compounds, and scarcity absorbs excess currency like a sponge, which leaves one uncomfortable question. If the people closest to the financial system spend their lives converting cash into assets as quickly as possible, what does that say about the future value of cash itself?